Have you ever had, when you've been working on music, have you ever had like an accidental erasure where you've, maybe deleted part of a song or an entire song and you've lost something?
Yeah, I have. I think, what year is it? 2020. Last year, I think last summer or so, I was putting together an EP with my buddy Monolithic, and we were doing like this split EP thing. And there was this really nice song I had done for it. I think I have it posted up on my SoundCloud. It's called like Not You, Me or something. I really liked it. It was the first time that I'd done this whole track in a single session, and I think I just had forgotten to save it. It was just totally gone. I tried to look for any sort of like archive, autosave type thing that I could find. Couldn't find anything. So I just have like this one shitty mix down of it, initial kind of rendering of it. I don't like it enough to release. It's got some errors in it, but
Did you try and recreate it and recapture what you had previously when you'd kind of built it all the way up?
I think I gave it an attempt, but the way my brain works is kind of like when I'm in that moment, it's hard for me to go back and kind of channel whatever I was feeling in that moment and kind of recreate the exact same thing, I think.
Yeah, I think with your music as well, every emotion when you're kind of telling an emotion in it, it's quite a specific feeling. Like it's a very kind of specific shade.
Yeah, definitely.
Do you delete tracks when you don't intend on using them, or do you kind of have an archive where you save everything, even if it's something you don't kind of determine good enough to go out?
I don't ever delete anything because again, kind of how I work and how my brain works is that I don't finish like a ton of stuff, but I start like an endless amount of things, hundreds of tracks, and only the ones that I'm able to, I guess, finish that idea in a relatively quick time period are the ones that I'm able to quickly get done and like kind of finalize the idea. But oftentimes there's things where I go back even like a year or two later, and I'll kind of rework from there, open up the project, get back into it. But I don't find myself like ever being like, I'm just going to totally delete this, throw it in the bin. Because it's nice for me to be able to go back and look upon those ideas.
When you come back to a track, so you come back to one like a year after, how are you coming? Are you trying to get back into that emotional headspace you were in when you put in the first version of it, or are you coming at it from a different angle?
I'm usually approaching it from, well, I don't know. That's a good question. I think I tend to approach it at a different angle, but I think the act of me even going back to it is kind of me going back to whatever the headspace I was in when I was making that. Because if I'm going back to it and I'm grooving with it and I'm liking it, I'm hearing things that I want to add or change, feeling inspired from it, I definitely am kind of going back into that same headspace.
When you hear the track back, are you able to pinpoint the exact headspace you were in when you first created it?
I'm not sure. It's hard for me to say. It's hard for me to know exactly. I don't know. It's hard for me to put into words, maybe, for me to explain, I guess, how I was even feeling on a track. Because I'm trying to think of an example of that. And I think it's kind of like I pick that up naturally from whatever I've kind of made from that. So I open something and I may be not aware of it, but it's kind of put me back into that place.
Is it easier for you to communicate without words then, when it comes to your music? Like you're saying there, it's sometimes a little bit difficult to put it into words. Is that why you kind of craft these house tracks? Has it always been easier to approach music from a kind of point of view where it's instrumental and it's kind of low, or the lo-fi house type thing?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the whole reason why I started making music was it's really just like a coping mechanism for me, and for me to voice things that I can't really voice myself and just put them out through in a format of sound, I guess.
Had you made music in any other domain before you came to house music?
No, but before, I guess, I kind of settled on what I liked doing and kind of defined my style. I was making stuff that I wouldn't really call house music, more of the realm of like vaporwave under the same name, but didn't really get picked up well, and I wasn't trying to get it picked up well. So
I guess sometimes you have to kind of work through a certain period to get to the point where you eventually have a sound that you start to become satisfied with. Like you wouldn't have been able to make it to the sound you have now without kind of experimenting with that and moving through it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it was like 2 years almost until I made this track called Stress, I think, and I realized at that point I was like, I really, really like this. I think this sound is like, I figured it out finally after experimenting so much for several years, and then you kind of just build upon that.
It's interesting that you mentioned as well how music is a you came to as a coping mechanism, and then you have those early tracks that are titled things like Stress and Overload that kind of almost kind of reflect that a little bit.
Yeah, they definitely do. And like I can go back and think of those moments in time, of like where I was at mentally when I listen to those tracks. They do reference that, absolutely.
How old were you when you first came to? What sort of period were you in your life when you came to use it in that way and create music like that?
So like for me, even creating music, I was at pretty much the darkest point, at least so far of my life. I was a freshman in university, and I got diagnosed with an autoimmune disease called eosinophilic granulomatosis with polyangiitis, EGPA for short. And basically, I had to come back home, get treated at a hospital here at Stanford, and this is a long process of treatment until I was able to get in remission. But I had a lot of free time because I wasn't in school for a good year as I was doing treatment and everything. And so with this free time, I was trying to figure out, like, you know, what do I do? How do I didn't have people to talk to about this. I still don't really have that many people to talk to about it. It's not a very common thing, especially for my age group. And it was a scary time in my life. I didn't really know if I was going to make it through that. And so for me, I'd always had a passion for music. I've always been really into music, been really into electronic music. And I don't remember what the exact moment was, but I just downloaded Logic or something. I was like, you know, I'm just going to start experimenting with this stuff. Eventually switched over to Ableton. I was starting to just make really spaced out, strange music, a lot of synths in it. That was just kind of how I was coping with my life at the time.
Did music have that escapist quality to it immediately for you? As soon as you started making it, did it become that escape?
Absolutely, yeah.
After that first year, did you go back to university after that?
Yeah, I did. I don't know if it was exactly a year after that. After I was in remission and my health was a little bit more stabilized, I went back to school.
What were you studying?
Computer science.
Oh, nice. Does that inform what you're doing in any way? Does it still have any impact?
That's a good question. I wouldn't say, because in terms of like how I make music, it's not like I'm like coding or doing live coding. So I've seen a lot of that stuff in recent years. But I think it influences somehow, because there's a lot of like tools and strange things I do that kind of stem from my knowledge in the field, I guess, perhaps.
Did you have a radio show at university as well?
I did. It was KUSF. That's when I started the whole purebred thing for me.
What sort of stuff were you playing on that show? Was this after you went back to university you had this show?
Yeah, this was after I went back. So I was on that show. I was doing like a bunch of house music and you know, low tempo electronic stuff too. And that was like it was really cool. I missed it a lot actually when I think about it. But I was doing like a 1 hour DJ mix. I brought in a little controller and stuff. And that was like, it was also kind of a platform for me to kind of test my music or kind of share it too. Kind of a private space, I feel like.
Do you remember the first reactions you got to your music when you were, you know, testing it out in that domain?
That was around the time that I put out those tracks All Right and Allis. The reaction was really good. It was, I remember, especially Allis, that like, the people around me and my peer group, whatever, were really into the track, and I kind of knew I had something special at that point.
Was that a couple of years ago? That's not too long ago that track came out, is it?
Yeah, 2018, I think. 17.
Is that one of the German phrases? Because I remember I took German in school, and Alles klar is one of the few phrases I recall.
Yeah. Yeah, it means everything, yeah.
Those songs are really kind of lo-fi. Like when you've progressed a bit from, you know, you've progressed quite significantly from that. They kind of start off in that lo-fi space, and it's kind of moved from there.
Yeah, that I was making a lot more gritty, dirtier stuff back then.
Since then as well, you've moved into, I mean, those came out as singles, right? Those kind of first tracks.
Right, yeah.
And now you've kind of gone for the EP format a little bit more recently. Do you find you communicate differently when you're using the EP format as opposed to singles, and you're kind of grouping tracks together?
So I think the first ever EP I think I did was Traumfolg, and that one was like that was a small label, whatever, Infinity Tracks Records, if I recall correctly. That was the first time I kind of had to like, or was able to piece together like a body of work that kind of had a consistent sound and meaning for me at least. And I really like doing that. And I, since kind of then way back wherever, I always was looking to put together EPs that had like a consistent body and story to kind of tell through it. But I struggled being able to put that together myself, I think, a lot. And the stuff that I've released this year, being able to kind of have help with that and guidance with that, I think it helped me a lot to be able to create like a consistent, like thorough release with them.
I guess when you're starting off as well, things are maybe a little bit more scattershot, are they? Do you kind of find that there's less of a cohesiveness when you first begin and you're kind of going in a lot of different directions as opposed to now when you can kind of group them quite neatly together?
I think for me, like personally, it's always going to be pretty scattered around there. I think that's just a quality of ADHD for me, because I find it hard to, come in, start making music on one day and have like the same feeling or energy or wherever I was. It's hard for me to kind of do that again, let's say the next day or for consistently for a whole week, right? One day I'll be making something that's really slow, down tempo, really moody. And then the next day I'm making something that's like 135 BPM, really fast-paced techno stuff. For me, I think it really helped being able to work with someone, specifically Sean Fade, that was able to kind of select from like a pool, and we were like, hey, let's put this together. And like obviously with my input evolved as well, and still kind of get that message. So basically just like extracting after the fact and kind of putting together those moods that fit together, but they weren't necessarily in linear time together, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I guess because you're probably feeling quite different every day. So maybe it takes a couple of weeks for you to come back around to a similar emotion that you were feeling when you maybe you write one track on a Tuesday and then it's not until the Sunday that you're kind of in a similar headspace again.
Yeah, absolutely.
When you're grouping them together, obviously, you write them all as individual tracks. When you put them together and you have them as that kind of one emotion, but maybe 6 tracks concerning it, how does that impact your view and the way you feel and think about the individual song? When you place them alongside other tracks, does it affect that in any way?
I aim to have it be affected, I guess. It's because like I want something to be kind of like a full picture that makes sense with like an EP. So I'm trying to think of an example here right now. My process of even, I guess, making a track listing for an EP or influence track listing and figuring it out, right? I'm listening to all these tracks in a sequential order. I'm seeing kind of like how they kind of fit together, and I want this perfect kind of balance of like kind of like going through a picture, telling a story, something like that. And that's really what I'm aiming for with that.
Are you trying to tell a story, like looking at it as a whole, or more like in a narrative sense, kind of going from song to song, like in a linear way?
I think in a narrative sense more so.
If we look at something like the last EP, do you have in your head, like, do you know what the kind of narrative structure is of those songs from track to track? Is it quite clearly mapped out for you?
It's somewhat clearly mapped out. I think a lot of the times it's mapped out for me at the time, and then I have to go back and kind of re-access those memories to kind of harness that back in. But yeah.
I know we were speaking about earlier, when you first came to music, it was this powerful tool for expressing yourself. Did you have any way of like creatively expressing yourself previously, or was this the first time you kind of felt you were able to say what you were thinking in a creative domain?
I think, yeah, it was the first time. Like when I look back, the only other ways that I was, I guess, creatively expressing myself, and I'm not even sure if I'd call it expressing myself, but like I find, that certain aspects of programming, computer science, right? It's a creative art in some degree, some respects, I guess, because you're creating something. I have crazy ideas for apps, stuff like that, whatever bullshit, but it's not the same. It's a different type of creativity, and I didn't have an output like that really at all.
Is it quite a design based thing?
Yeah, I'd say that.
Well, when it comes to the kind of how much time it's occupying in your headspace, when did it kind of swing from computing to music? When did music start to occupy more time in your headspace than computers?
I'd say by 2018, when I was really, really liking the stuff that I was making, and I kind of had an idea that it was going somewhere. I noticed that like my ability to balance school and like music and those two headspaces became pretty conflicting, and that kind of only got worse as time went on.
I guess it's tough because when people love creating music, it can become quite an obsessive thing in some ways,
Yeah,
and it's hard to kind of switch off from it and take yourself out of that headspace.
absolutely. Yeah.
Have you ever been able to do that? Have you ever found a way where you can kind of bring yourself out of that headspace and focus on something else, or is it you're kind of just locked in it all the time now?
I'm pretty much locked in it all the time. And the problem for me is that, like, when I was doing, like, music, I guess, part time, and I had other freelance type gigs going on, like freelance, like iOS development stuff was what I was doing a lot of the time. And for me to try to switch between those two headspaces was like killer because I'd work on something for like 10 hours or something, and I'm just like a zombie, only thinking about code. And then to try to kind of get into that creative headspace is pretty tough. But then, like, I remember when I was still in school and I'd like be working on a track till like 5 or 6 in the morning, totally losing track of time. And then like having to switch that brain off, be like, oh shit, I have class in like an hour. It was tough to deal with.
Would you kind of make a track in a night? Because remember you saying earlier you kind of construct them in a relatively short time frame if you finish them the kind of first time around.
Yeah, it used to, I guess when I was still doing things more in the box, so to speak, and I guess when 2020 wasn't going on, I'd kind of know when I had something really good because I'd be able to power it out typically in like 1 to 2 hours. My brain was running full steam ahead, and was able to get the full idea out really quickly.
How does that work for you? Is that like something kind of sparks in your head and suddenly you have a full picture of the entire song and it's just a case of translating that? Or is it more, it's kind of just one thing goes on to the next and a momentum begins that kind of ends up leading to a full track?
For me, I think it's more the momentum, and it feels so good when that happens. When you're just building something, you're like, oh man, this fits perfect, and yeah, it's definitely the momentum.
What emotion do you find easiest to write music from?
I guess sadness. I don't know. I hmm. I don't know if existential dread was an emotion. I'd say that, but
Has making music had any impact upon the conversations that you're having with yourself when it comes to kind of existential issues like that?
I'd say so. Actually, I'd say so a lot because oftentimes when I'm in that headspace, not even like working on music or something, there's tracks of my own that like will even put me in that headspace, or I'll kind of go back and seek those out because I'm weird. But like the stuff that I make is it's for me primarily, I guess.
What sort of tracks do that for you? What sort of tracks take you straight back to that place?
I mean, right off the bat, I can think of like one of the more recent ones, like a Glysphere, on the Seal EP, the ambient one. But tracks like Stress kind of put me in that headspace too as well.
Do you ever use them as a tool? Like if you want to ponder those things or if you're feeling those things, do you sometimes put those tracks on to kind of further the conversations you're having?
Absolutely. I do that really, really often. Kind of embarrassing, but yeah.
Do you become detached from the music in any way after you make it? Like, does that still feel like your track when you're putting it on to induce that headspace, or does it become a kind of separate, objective thing?
I think, good question. I think I'm somewhat detached from it, but at the same time, it's almost like you're more proud of it because it's like something you did. You know, it's like the same obsession and passion you have for listening to anything else that your brain is like, oh, this is new, and like, I love this track, or it's old nostalgic favorite. It's something a little bit more special for me.
It's possibly the closest you maybe get to being experiencing it from like the point of view of a listener as well. Do you think?
Right.
Once,
Yeah.
once that detachment kind of starts to seep in a little bit.
Yeah, I think so as well. Because you have this period too when like you're working on mixing it and you've heard it like 6 million times, you know, especially when you're doing those final mix downs or whatever, really tedious, and you start to hate the track, but you're able to revisit it with kind of fresh ears later on.
So do you leave tracks like after a while after you finish mixing them? Do you kind of let them sit for a bit and then come back to them and kind of just give them one last check to be sure that you're happy with it? Do you need to take a bit of time to gain that perspective back again?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think anyone that I've worked with label-wise would say the same because I think I'm really bad with it. I overthink everything and nothing ever really feels 100% done. So I'm always taking huge amounts of time going back and like kind of re-falling in love, fixing things, stuff like that.
Were you like that from the office? Well, when you were speaking there about, overthinking things a little bit, when you first started crafting music, were you quite meticulous from the get-go?
I think a lot of my productions early on were like way overthinking things. So yeah, I would say that, yeah.
Have you got a little bit better about balancing it out? keeping that perspective so that you don't overthink it quite so much, but it still stays true to you because it's obviously part of your personality.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I mean that more in like production side of things. And I think as time went on and I earned money from this and I was able to shift how I produce music, I was able to kind of work it around how my brain works. So working with hardware, synthesizers, stuff like that, just being able to click record and bang stuff out with my hands, using everything. That kind of helped the process for me to be able to do things like efficiently and quickly.
Are you full time now working on it?
Yeah, I am.
Does that increase or decrease pressure when it comes to making music?
It definitely increases pressure. It's hard for me to speak of that outside of perhaps this year, because this year feels the most pressure ever because there's no real end in sight of when things will get better, I think. Like I think I feel this internal pressure too as well because I haven't felt like I made it, so to speak. I haven't like done these tours, world tours, everyone like in this realm of music, touring DJs and stuff get to do. And a lot of that was this year. I had a lot in store, a lot planned. And I just feel like there's this period where I've achieved a lot of success with my music and everything. But I feel so rewarded when I'm like in a room playing shows in that energy. And I think my lack of that, feeling that or getting to see that and feel that kind of makes me feel like I still have so much more work to do, like to kind of get myself out there and keep creating and keep pushing out good music, basically, I guess.
Can you use that to fuel you in a positive way, though? Can you kind of channel that into an energy that you can then create music from?
Yeah, absolutely. And I try to channel like anything, I guess, into the music that I create, including like my anger at anything relative to this industry or the world that we live in. And it is a really powerful fuel for me.
As well, with what you were saying about the touring thing kind of being taken away at the minute, it's almost like part of the process is gone, maybe, because you don't see people connecting with your music in the same way. Like that's the one space we kind of have now where you can see people directly resonating with it and connecting with what you're making. And when that's gone, does it feel like there's a bit of a gap there?
Yeah, absolutely. It feels like a huge gap. And like, I feel like I don't know if it's strange for me to say that, like, I feel like getting gigs is like almost an indicator of like, you're succeeding at this job. Essentially, you're going to be able to survive off it. That too is also having that gone. It feels strange. Like I feel like I don't know my place and how well I'm doing, or should I keep doing this as like a full-time job type thing? Will I be able to, I guess,
Yeah, I guess if you're doing a tour, say you do a tour of the US or whatever, or Europe, and all the gigs are packed out, that gives you a real sense of energy and fuel, and you know where the project's at.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's not there at the moment. What was the last show you played?
The last one I played was this festival in San Diego called Crossed, CRSSD. That was March 9th. It was like the last weekend before everything got shut down.
Did you know we were going to have a gap for this long at that point? Did you have a sense of that, or were you kind of...
Oh yeah. No, I knew it was bad. I think by the end of February, and that things were not going to be good. I was cautious to even play that show. I remember flying through the airports. I was the only one with a mask on. Had a couple Karens come up to me and be like, "You don't need that mask." Yeah, I knew things were going to get bad.
I feel like that's quite an American characteristic as well, like kind of going up to people and quite kind of culturally, like that wouldn't be as much of a thing.
Yeah. It's an interesting country we live in here, and it's not a good one. So,
I mean, it's got some positives to it. It's the same as everything in the world. There's pros and cons.
Just interesting culture, I guess.
How does it compare to Berlin for you? Because that's where did you grow up in Berlin, or your family from just kind of Germany?
No, the family's just from there, and they live there now. But I grew up actually in the Bay Area, so I've been experienced to both cultures. I've seen outside of the U.S. and everything, and this is not my preferred place to live, especially for the long term.
Did you go over to Germany a lot when you were growing up?
Yeah, and it definitely had an influence, I think, as I approached my like adult years, I think.
Does it allow you to see, let's say, when you're growing up, does it allow you to see the country you're from or you're living in and growing up in a slightly different light?
Absolutely. I've spoken about this a lot, and I have this conversation, I think, a lot with like friends in the U.S. because and most of the people I hang out with the U.S. Have been outside the U.S., seen the U.S. outside the U.S. Because I think we have this thing in this country where a lot of people haven't traveled outside the country. In Europe, it's easy. You can take these cheap holidays to Spain, wherever. You can go see other parts of the world relatively easily, right? Just on a train, whatever. So many people are narrow-minded in the fact that they buy into all the propaganda. They think everywhere else is like a shithole country or something. And I think it's really important to be able to see how other places work and their quality of life and how other cultures act. It just makes you a well-rounded person in general, right?
Why is it you think, what you were saying there about people buying into that propaganda, where's that propaganda coming from? Why is that a thing? Just because I feel like culturally here, that's not really existing. Everyone kind of, I guess like you say, we have the ability to go to Spain on a cheap holiday or whatever, but it's not something that feels present here.
In my opinion, based on like historical presence or whatever in the U.S., history in the U.S., a lot of it comes from the generation, like the boomer generation or whatever, right? They're spoon-fed propaganda all throughout 50s into, current day, I guess you could say. But they're told, right, this is a time where communists everywhere, stuff like that. And so the parental generation of most people my age, a lot of them, they bought into that propaganda, whether or not they are aware of it. The other thing, too, is a lot of Americans think that whatever they've been told is that this is the greatest country on earth, that we're the free world, we're number one, all this stuff. So why would I ever leave? That's how a lot of people see it. And it was strange. I can remember the first couple of times I met people's parents and like they were just like, yeah, why would I ever go anywhere else? Why would I stray anywhere away from the U.S.? We're the best country. And I was like, what the hell? It's interesting.
I mean, I guess with the 50 states as well, it kind of feels like it's almost 50 individual countries. Does it feel quite culturally different?
I'd say more so on the fact of like maybe geographical areas, because it is quite different state to state for the most part, but there are like ideological and kind of like general cultural trends that persist throughout like the whole West Coast, and even the West Coast shares a lot of cultural norms with like the East Coast, but these are mainly like the highly populated, educated cities that are well off economically as well, right? Like California, Washington, and Oregon, they share a lot in common.
Are they kind of slightly left leaning as well?
Yeah, absolutely.
Blue states,
yeah.
Well, I'm interested in a few of the kind of, I mean, two of the kind of big issues that we see over here about the US is gun control and healthcare. What's the kind of perception of that like on the inside? Because to us, it's kind of crazy that you guys don't have, a healthcare system or anything, and it's crazy to us that you can walk about with guns. Is that the same thing? There are other people that feel like that, or is it very much just kind of embedded in the culture there now, and it's a norm?
No, it's crazy for me too. It's crazy for. So these two particular matters, especially on like I was mentioning, the West Coast and like the East Coast, at least some portion of the East Coast, say New York, stuff like that. Those two examples are things that we have more of the European mindset for, I'd say, in general. The politicians, not so much. The big money interests, not so much. But I think a lot of people, especially Americans after COVID, which I'm still a little shocked, but I've seen a lot more people in favor of universal healthcare now. In the last couple of years. I think the 2016 election with Bernie kind of bringing this to the forefront helped a lot of people understand that. I still don't understand why we're not doing it yet. And then with gun control is even a harder thing to combat, just because so many people take the Constitution as if it's like a Bible. We have set of legal rules, I guess, so to speak, that are completely out of date. They're not made for the modern era. They've never been like updated for the modern era, times that we live in. And I don't see how you can still abide by that, but it's too hard to deal with the repercussions of the rest of America, right? As we've seen with this recent election, half the country is still voting in a way that most educated people wouldn't really expect or hope for at all. So yeah, I don't know.
I think the key word you said there was educated. If everyone was slightly more I don't know. It's so difficult now as well to get
The education system in the U.S. is abysmal. Really, it's not even good. Like in wealthy, coastal states, there's even huge problems with it there. I think just fundamental flaws that the system needs to be rewritten. Really,
what are those issues? What are those kind of fundamental flaws?
access to, I mean, for education in particular, access to quality education is so hard to achieve because of the kind of wealth barrier for even for like good quality public education, right? Like I was privileged enough to go to a good high school, or good schools in the area, and down in the area like Silicon Valley, San Jose area. Those are good public schools for the most part. But if you, let's say you drive 20 minutes to a different part of the area, right? You're in an area where it's lower income or something, and the schools are worse. The education system is just not as good. The teachers are paid less. They're not happy with their jobs. We really don't value. I think we don't value teachers in terms of pay. We don't give them fair wages here in the public education system. And then if you want to go to private school, it's super expensive. Like sending your kid to a private high school or something in the U.S. is like a college tuition. And then don't even get me started on the university tuition, whatever. That's
Yeah, man.
even worse.
Student loans are crazy.
Yeah, they're abysmal. Like I have friends that are 300K in debt after leaving school. Like
It's just insane. Teachers not being kind of paid to a fair degree. It's kind of the same thing with cops as well, isn't it? That's a job
yeah,
that isn't really valued as highly as it should be, which is probably where a lot of the problems from that are stemming at the minute.
yeah, I think so as well. I mean, when you go into the cops thing, a lot of the problems I think too with that have to do more with the militarization, and that's something I don't think will ever get fixed here either, because the military-industrial complex kind of funds half of America at least.
I mean, I think that's kind of the the main problem is that it all comes down to money. The same thing when you have lobbying and elections and stuff. It's all just a little bit corrupt almost.
Oh, it's 100% corrupt. there's there's no way around it. It's pure corruption.
Are you still thinking about moving to Europe?
Yeah, I mean, ideally, whenever it can be done, and I was even considering it last year, but the timing was not. When my lease was up, it was just wasn't going to work out, and I didn't feel like I had kind of solidified my presence, so to speak, like in Europe, where I'd feel comfortable completely dropping my life here and moving over for the pursuit of a music career, I guess.
Do you feel like bigger in America in terms of your kind of fan base then, as opposed to Europe?
I don't, and I definitely don't anymore at all. It was more too many unknowns. I guess I worry about things too much, clearly. But yeah, I barely get any love in the U.S.
I mean, it's a big move though, like going from the US to Europe. I know what you're saying
Yeah,
about you worrying about those unknowns, but they're probably understandable worries.
yeah, but at least I'd have a decent healthcare, good
Yeah.
public transportation, things like that.
Do you still speak German as well?
Yeah, I'm rusty though. It's been almost a year since I've been in Germany now, so.
When you're in Germany, are you speaking German all the time?
Yeah, it's nice because you get back, and within like 3 days or whatever, your brain kind of reactivates.
Do you think in German when you're there?
Yeah, I've been like it's so strange because like it's typically about 3 days for me, just being around and speaking and hearing other people, and I get situated back into it, and then I'll start having dreams in German, which is a very strange sensation, I guess, for me.
Is it that idea though of thinking in another language? It just flips. When you're thinking in another language, how does that impact the music you're making? Like if you're making music and you're thinking in German instead of English, does that have any impact upon the creativity?
It seems to, and I'm like not always aware of it, I guess. But when I can go back, and look at like the stuff I was making on the road, whatever, from last December, it's got like a totally different influence and vibe to it that like I'm not always able to I certainly couldn't capture that, like being stuck here all year. But yeah, it definitely has an impact on it.
Do you take any influence from the kind of scene that's going on there at the minute as well? Because I know like kind of Berlin's got some of the best clubs in the world and stuff when it comes to dance music and things like that as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Like when I'm there, I try to go out as much as possible, and it has a huge influence on me. Like I'll go home, whatever, next 2 mornings later or something, and you're hearing music in your head because you've been blasting it through your drums in your chest for the last 48 hours or so, and I'm already starting to get influence from that, I think, immediately afterwards.
Yeah, those clubs are crazy. I've heard stories about those clubs as well where people will be like stay inside them for like 24 hours and stuff. Like they never close.
Yeah, and yeah, it's like at Berghain, for example, they'll open up on like a Thursday for a party, and it's the same gig running until like Monday morning.
Man.
Yeah.
A lot of your song titles are in German as well. At what point in the process does a song title kind of attach itself to the track?
It's either immediately, kind of when I first save it in the project, or it's kind of at the final stages when I'm going back through everything and kind of reflecting upon the track and where I was with the headspace of that track and kind of determining a track name from there, I guess.
Does it kind of just appear, or do you spend a while kind of trying to brainstorm ideas for it?
It just appears. I have a hard time explaining it, I think, because it just kind of happens, and I go with it as soon as it appears.
Baum. Baum means tree, right? That was no, 2 EPs ago you put that out?
Yeah, that's correct.
You bought a new drum machine just before you began work on that as well.
Correct, yeah.
Did you have any of the songs prior to its introduction, or did everything kind of come once you bought that instrument?
Yeah, no, every one of those tracks was made after March 2019. So yeah, it was all post that.
Do you find picking up a new instrument or a new piece of gear, is that always kind of a catalyst for creativity?
It's not always, especially it has been in the past. It's a bad kind of habit or process to get yourself into in the first place, I think, because then you start getting this mindset like, ooh, I'll just buy this new synth and I'll come up with some crazy new ideas, I think.
It's an expensive habit as well.
Yeah, it's a terribly expensive habit. So I try not to do that as much. But I will say in the past, it has definitely had that effect on me.
Do you have any catalysts for creativity? Do you have any things that you know that if you kind of do, they're going to spark something within you?
I may have been able to answer that maybe a year ago, but I find it really hard to, if I did, I don't now. Because I think my processes that I maybe wasn't too aware of, or I was able to achieve that based on my lifestyle pre-COVID, because I've been inside pretty much the whole year. I can't really take very many risks with this. I'm sure you're aware, but we've really had no relief or guidance on COVID. We haven't handled it very well, obviously. Continue to not handle it very well. And been trying to get my creativity going because it's hard for me to feel inspired like I used to. And I can't say I have something that I can think of that is an immediate unlocker like that right now. Every day feels like the same. I totally lose track of months. I'm just living, existing right now.
Music tends to be, it kind of thrives on change. Has being a musician made you more comfortable with change in any way? Can you kind of channel it in a positive way?
I think so. Absolutely. I tend to try to channel it when I have something to work on. I think when it's not a permanent bad change, probably. Because when this started, I was definitely feeling pretty creative, although I had a lot of anxiety going on. I think I had this initial kind of burst, and I was also finishing up a few projects here and there. And I had this initial kind of creative burst after setting up my studio and everything like that. And then, things just continued to get worse. We started getting wildfires, and I just kind of tapped out. It was hard for me to walk in here and be like, I'm going to be creative today.
What did you do instead? Because I know we were speaking earlier about how it's kind of an obsession for you making music. How did you cope when creativity isn't flowing?
I guess I'd start my day with doing the business side of music. I handle all that myself. I don't have a manager, no booking agent. Not that that's relevant right now, but so I handle all that during the day or whatever. And I'd even get burnt out from doing that, communicating with people, replying to messages, stuff like that. And then when I'm not, sometimes I did pick up a road bike earlier this summer. That's been a nice break for me. When the weather or air quality is permitting. And then outside of that, it's not much else. I got video games. That's video games and movies. Just anything to keep myself away from reality, I guess.
When you go out on the road bike, and it's another kind of form of escape, how does that form of escape differ to creating music when you kind of clear your head in that way?
When I'm creating music, I have this like, I'm in a full tunnel vision, just like I'm locked into this particular idea concept. I guess when I think about it with biking though too, I guess I'm kind of just living in that moment, pushing through, focused in on what I'm doing. And maybe they aren't too different really, but one is certainly more mentally rewarding, I think, for me in the longer term, obviously.
Yeah, I guess exercise can have a really positive impact upon mental health as well, though.
It definitely
That kind of rush
does.
you get after you finish doing a run, or I mean, in your case, a cycle.
Yeah, it definitely does.
I was going to ask as well about samples, because obviously, they're a kind of cornerstone of your work. I'm interested. How does it work when it comes to clearing samples? Because I was reading today about how Lou Reed's estate gets 100% of the royalties from "Can I Kick It," the Tribe Called Quest song, and then
Holy shit.
Logic sampled that, and then Lou Reed still gets 100%.
Are you serious?
It's crazy, man.
I wasn't aware of that one. That's insane. I was how is that legal? Uh,
Considering how it's like it's a tiny part of that song as well.
yeah. Yeah. What? Wow. Okay. Yeah. So I'm sorry. What was your what
Sorry,
was
the question was how does like clearing samples work? Because I was kind of just interested in that area of it. When it comes to you and utilizing samples in your work, how do you go about clearing them and knowing that you're going to be able to use them and not get fucked like Tribe Called Quest did?
So my aim when I create music from the start, because we live in an age of like content ID, copyright systems and everything, even on like SoundCloud, private upload stuff and everything. My aim has always been to, if I am sampling something, if I am sampling vocal or something, to kind of cheat the computer and cheat whatever content ID system by making it the either completely unrecognizable or changed so much that it's not able to be copyright striked or not using that much of a sample in the first place, I guess. And that's kind of always been my approach to it. And then as I went further along, was looking for samples, my methods of finding samples became way more obscure and odd. It's sampling is still something I struggle with. It's hard for me to find something that fits perfectly, whatever. And I don't have any direct normal approach to it, I guess. It's very random. But yeah, it's as it's gone by, it's just more obscure, strange stuff that like, the label doesn't even exist anymore. The art, the group doesn't exist. They're dead or whatever. It's in this old USSR thing or something. So it's like there's no one you can even contact to reach out for clearance on a lot of these things.
How do you find this stuff?
YouTube, you can get in some pretty obscure stuff on YouTube, and a lot of I've watched a lot of movies. I spend a lot of time watching strange films, obscure stuff, and all the time I'll hear like some weird song, look it up, I'm like, oh, I really like this. Let me take this part. Yeah.
Is that the same process when it comes to finding new music, just in a listening way? Because I was looking at you do that weekly playlist, right, on your Spotify, and there's always like such an eclectic mix on that as well.
It's similar. It's definitely similar. I definitely pick up through that way as well. It's been nice. Kind of with music, I guess we have the advantage with like services like Spotify where we're algorithmically tailored to us. So there is like a ton of stuff that I'll discover all the time that's just been like basically algorithmically served to me. And also just over the years, so many artists and labels that I follow and kind of keep on their radar and watching things like that. It's also kind of find a lot of stuff like that.
I mean, that playlist really is, it has a massive range in it. Like, you go from like Jesse Brew to like Molchat Dama. It's like
Yeah. Yeah. I like to like it's just like it really is like what I'm listening to whatever that week, and I like to keep it diverse, and I'm really glad people like it, I guess.
Well, I mean, those two examples I just mentioned there, are they tapping into different sides of you? Are you looking for different things in both of those songs when they're so different?
Absolutely. I mean, like it's funny you mentioned the Molchat Dama one. Kind of want to sample that.
They're blowing up. I remember listening to them at the start of lockdown, and they had like 600,000 monthly listeners. And I went on today when I was looking at your playlist, and they've got like 2 million.
They got a ton now. Yeah, it is definitely two different sides, I guess. Though it's.
Do you think the manner in which you use samples as well has changed, like through your songwriting?
Perhaps. I haven't used a lot of samples this year that I've like seeked out, I guess. Just because my creative process has been very long and like spaced out this year. So it's not the same. And I think my production methods have changed a lot too, where I'm mostly using hardware. Like, for example, I picked up an Electron Octa track kind of when this thing started, which is a analog sampler thing. And I bought it for the purpose of kind of being able to manipulate vocal samples and stuff on the fly in a machine, with hardware, instead of having to go into Ableton and do all that, my process with that. And I think that does tend to make me use them in a kind of a different manner. But I still also like to approach it from kind of the in the box type way as well, too. So I don't know.
Using that so that you can kind of manipulate them on the fly and do it in the moment. Do you find your creativity kind of works best when it's in that kind of spontaneous fashion?
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's really why I started to pick up a whole bunch of synths and stuff, because it just helps me to be able to turn everything on and start building out an idea like that.
Has that really impacted on like the way you build your kind of studio setup or your creative setup? Is everything kind of geared to engineer around that idea of being able to capture things in the moment and get them as soon as you can?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm still not like 100% where I'd like things to be. Obviously, it's very financially limited, I guess. Music gear is expensive, but that is my aim, to have exactly that perfectly how I want it.
The new EP as well, Ego, feels a little bit more fluid, a little bit maybe more easygoing than BAM. It's got, when you think about something like Highball, it's got a slightly different quality to it. Were you in a different headspace when you made that as opposed to BAM? Were they coming from different places?
It's definitely a different place. It may sound strange. I channeled a lot of anger on that EP. I feel like, especially tracks like M Type. There were some things going on with my life.
It is a little bit frantic.
Yeah. It's an angry song. There's a lot of things going on in my life. I was just like stressed out, and personal relationships with friends, fizzling out, stuff like that. And I think I was just unintentionally maybe capturing that, and then intentionally piecing it together after the fact. With that. But yeah, Bomb was like a totally kind of different story from that one, I'd say.
It's interesting what you say about the anger coming from something like relationships fizzling out, because that's kind of such a gradual thing, which is maybe why the anger on the EP is kind of more subtle, maybe? Do you think there's a connection there?
Yeah, I think so.
Have you channeled like different types of anger into your work before?
Yeah, all the time, actually, when I think about that. I feel like most of my tracks that at least I consider hard-hitting are like, it's usually some manifestation of anger. I've been dealt, in my opinion, a fairly shitty stack of cards with my disease, and I still carry so much anger of like basically kind of being robbed from having a normal and healthy life. And I think that's represented sometimes in my music a lot.
When you channel that into your music, does it help in any way, or is it a different thing altogether?
I think maybe it helps in the moment. It definitely helps, I guess, overall. I'm in a better place mentally than where I was when I started off with this stuff. Like, I've come to terms with a lot of things in my life. So I'd say it helps.
And do you think that's a result of the music, or just maybe a result of maturing?
Probably both.
Or not maturing, but getting older and, kind of sitting on it a little longer.
It's definitely both. And I would say maturing too, because I mean, I was 18 or something when this started. What my fully adult brain is kind of just formed now. Something like that.
What is it, 25? Your kind of cerebral cortex stops developing or something?
Yeah, so okay, I got one more year.
When it comes to ego as well, what kind of a role would you say your ego plays in your creativity and your music?
It'd be narcissistic for me to be like, I'm the least egotistical person ever. But I think my ego is more represented in like my proudness of like my achievements. Like, I'm really proud to be able to have music that like has been shared with people all across the world, and like people send me these like heartfelt messages about it. Like that boosts my ego like a ton. But I also am I have such bad imposter syndrome. I feel like I'm so in between on things. Like, one day I'm feeling great about something, next day I'm like, this sucks. Why would anyone ever listen to this? And still, most of the time, I'm still really shocked that I'm here. And I'm like, is this just luck? Do people actually like my music? Like, I I don't know. It's interesting, I guess.
Do you think you'll ever be able to overcome that, or do you think that's something that's going to be a constant? Does it feel like something that could leave?
I hope I could overcome it, but I also feel like it kind of humbles me, at least a little bit. So I don't know if I'll ever be able to overcome it. I've got, it could just be like a manifestation of anxiety for me too, which I'll never get over that. I don't think so.